All right, let's get into crop jitter and data prep and how those two interact. This is definitely something that I think has caused some confusion, so I'm putting together a video. This will kind of go over what's going on with crop jitter, what it is, and how you prepare your data and the image sizes that you hand over to the EveryDream trainer are going to impact how training goes. So for the sake of this video, I've got a bunch of test images here that are just different images at different sizes, slightly different sizes and different aspect ratios. So I've got a couple, a really tall, a really wide, a sort of wide, and then a whole bunch of square images here to use as examples of what's going on in the trainer. So let's kind of show you what these example training images are and what happens when they go through the training process and the pre-processing. So first thing I'm going to show you here is these images and the sizes, and I want you to make at least quick note. Hopefully this shows up okay in the video, but the sizes here, we've got a 1920 by 1440, 1420 by 1440, 1440 by 1420. So these are just slightly, really tiny, very close to square, but with very slight difference. One is slightly wider and one is slightly taller. We've got a 512 by 512, a 520 by 520, 540 by 540, and then a couple other ones that are tall and narrow aspect ratio, but all fairly large. And again, we'll take a look at those here in a blown up view. And yeah, you have to ignore that. Windows does that sometimes where it stretches them. That's not actually what they look like. Again, so we've got most of these are square, and we've got a wide and a tall, and then a super kind of a super wide one here. So let's take a look at what happens when the trainer. So these are all good images except for the 512 one, and we'll get into that in a moment. So let's look at what these look like after, as the trainer does the pre-processing. And again, what I'm about to show you is what the trainer does for you. So keep that very close in mind when we go look at the training images as they've been pre-processed. So if we kind of just compare here, if we blow these up and we compare, see if I can get these about the same. You can see here's the images as given to the trainer, and here's what they look like when pre-processed. And you'll notice nothing's cropped, or at least barely, if you can even notice it. And that's very important to understand, that even if we are giving it a like the 1440 by approximately 1440 by 1440 images, or one of these big 1920 by 1080 images, the trainer, when it does its automatic resizing, cropping, blah 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 magic, all the context is still there. It's not like we've only see the center of these test images. The whole image is there, except for maybe a tiny, tiny little bit on the edges. That's the most important thing to remember, is that you can feed in 1920, 2K, 4K, whatever you want, and this is what they look like when the trainer does pre-processing on its own. So you don't need to worry about doing pre-cropping and resizing or anything like that. So after that's been explained, let's look at what the actual sizes are. Again, this is just for demonstration. I do not want anyone to do like this fine cropping that I'm about to show you, because the trainer does it for you. And it's actually quite important that you let the trainer do it for you. So you can see here, this very first one comes in at 1920 by 1440, and then when we look at it here, it ends up as 576 by 448, which is a pretty much very, very close to the original aspect ratio. So let's open this up. You can see here's the image. You can see it's quite large, right? So it's a 1920 by 1440 image. Did I get that right? Yeah, 1440 image. It's quite large. I don't think it'll even fit in the video size that I'm recording, but you get the point. Nice and big. And then for training purposes, again, automatically done by the trainer. Don't do this yourself. Is what it looks like when it's trained. And you can see here that the whole image is there, like all the stuff is still there, but it's just been resized and fit into the size that's required by the trainer. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So let's look at another example. Here's another one. This one is one that I approximately cropped to square. This is just an example of, let's say that this is what I wanted to train. It's just this big circle and the little circle and the Indian head, and I didn't care about these little other circles and sides. And we can look at what that guy looks like when it's resized. You can see, again, this is what the trainer does automatically for you. It takes this image, this bigger image, and it puts it into the size that's required for training in Stable Diffusion without completely exploding your VRAM. Because there's just no way to train a 1920 by 1440 image native res. But again, you can see that everything is there. All the stuff is there. We haven't like center cropped. We didn't like just end up with this little circle in the middle or anything like that. And then, so that explained. And here, maybe we'll do one more here. Here's the tall one. Here's the tall one. Here's the original. It's super big, right? We can't train at that. It's 1080 by 1920. And then if we look at that same one, when it's been set up for the training, it's still the whole image is there, but it's just been resized to an appropriate size for training purposes. So the other thing we need to talk about is crop jitter. And one of the things that EveryDream does, and I think it sets it apart, is that we are doing a crop jitter, which is basically, if you do look at these, here's the 1920 image, and then if we go to the one that's been resized, one thing you'll note is there is a tiny little bit here on the right side that has been cropped off. If we look at the original, you can see we see the full circle over here, and these corner circles are there in full. But when it goes into training, and this is just random, so it's not always going to be the right side, there's a tiny little bit that's been cropped off. And part of that is because the trainer requires that the images be a particular increment of sizes. They have to be 64 by 64 increments of size, so that's why we see this as 576 by 448. Those are increments of 64 pixels. It's just required. It has to be done. And so there is a tiny little bit here on the right side, and right here you can see along this right edge that ends up getting cut off. That's not the right one. This is the right one. You can see that we did that. But that's not always what happens. It doesn't always just crop the right side off. What it actually does is, I'll show you a video here. Here's what's actually going on. You can see, now this is the example that we were just showing you. See, it was cropping off a little bit more of the right side, but what's actually happening in the trainer is every time the image gets repeated, so your repeat setting in your YAML, or if you're running multiple epochs, even if you're running a really big data set and you're only running one repeat, the next epoch, when it sees that same image, it retrieves that same image off disk, it's going to shift it around a little bit. And this improves the quality of training. And the next thing, and so let that sink in a little bit. These images that get read by the trainer every time a batch gets pulled in, and we get one step in the trainer. It pulls in, however many the number of images in your batch size. It pulls in a couple images. It does a real slight crop. It fits them into the sizes appropriate for training. Does this all automatically. This is not stuff you should be doing before training. And it kind of subtly moves the image around. So you'll run, say, 20. Let's say you have you're training somebody's face, and you've got 20 images of that person's face. It's going to pull that image in every time there's a repeat on the image. So you have one epoch and you have 50 repeats. It's going to pull in that one epoch. It's going to read every single image 50 times, And every one of those 50 times, it does this little tiny shift of the image to improve the training quality. Um, but one of the limitations, and this is probably the most important thing to talk about, is that your images need to be a little bit bigger, at least a little bit bigger than you actually want to train at. So if you're going to train at resolution of 512 and your input image, let's go look at this input image here. See, here's one of my example training images in my input folder. It is 512 by 512. And the problem with training at 512 resolution and only giving the trainer 512 by 512 images is that there's no room for the crop jitter to work, right? There's no pixels on the side that I can crop off in the code and still fit it into a 512 resolution training size. Now, if we look at 520 by 520, well, there we go. We've got 8 extra pixels. That would be 4 around all the way around the outside, or you could consider it 8 in each direction, right? We're slightly larger. So if I want to train at 512, these two images are significantly better than this one here with 512 by 512. And let's look at why. So you can see here this one is highlighted in blue with the blue background. This is the 512 by 512 one, and you'll notice as this animation plays, this one doesn't shift around. So that means during training, well, there's no crop jitter. There's just no room to do that. If we go here to the top right one, this is the 520 by 520 image. You can see since there's a couple extra pixels around the outside, larger than we need to train at 512, you can see this one guy gets moved around just a little bit every time it's repeated. And the same thing here with the 540 one down here. 540 by 440 is just a little bit. So there's a little bit extra on the outside. And so then you might ask, well, if you give it a huge image, is it not going to crop, a ton of it? And no. There's a limit on how much is going to get cropped out around the outside. So if we look at this one here, the second from the bottom left, this is the square. This one's 1440 by 1440. You can see it still does the same thing, and it doesn't look like it's, we're still not getting crop to the center. We're getting just a little subtle movement around there as the crop jitter algorithm works. So that's really kind of the gist of the video, is that I really want to impress on you when you're preparing your data that you want images that are larger than the resolution you want to train at. So if you want to train at 512 by 512, or then that's just the resolution of 512 in the YAML. Then make sure your images are bigger than that. Don't make them exactly 512 by 512. Also, don't make them exactly these things I showed you here, this 576 by 448 or 384 by 640 or 640 by 384. Don't crop your images down to those sizes. Don't worry about it. You can go look at the aspects.py file and you can see what's going on and what the buckets end up being, but if you look at that and then decide, oh, I want to retrain my images to those sizes, you're making a mistake. Please don't do that. You will decrease the quality of your training. Just feed your images in like this, except for this one. don't do the 512 by 512 one. Feed in 1920 by 1440 or 1420 by 1440 or 1920 by 1080 or 1080 by 1920. These feed it in. Feed it in one or two, 1.5 megapixel. You can go ahead and do 4K if you don't care about your disk space. That's fine. It's not going to hurt anything. But yeah, just don't crop your stuff down like that. Like just let the trainer do its thing. On this is just kind of a behind the scenes look into what's going on, and so you can maybe avoid doing things that I've seen some people do, where they think, oh, I'll crop to 512 by 512. Yeah, ideally you don't. If you already have images that are already cropped by 512 by 512 and you threw away the originals, well, so be it. It would be better to go and reacquire those images and keep them in a slightly higher resolution, but you can still roll with it. It's just not ideal. The crop jitter doesn't work on it. So that's pretty much it. Hopefully this was not more confusing than it is helpful. If you have any other questions, ask on the EveryDream Discord, and I will try to answer those or maybe upload another video that maybe kind of clears that stuff up. Thanks.